Hello everyone, I'm Nayaswami Asha, and this is the first of a new series of webinars, a new subject for our ongoing webinars. And this time what we're going to do is something called 26 Keys for Living with Greater Awareness. And if you go onto the online with Ananda, somehow or another, they'll provide for you what is really, I believe, just reprinted from an old Clarity magazine, 1998 is my belief is when this came out. 99 actually. This is also printed as a little pamphlet, but I'm not sure any of the pamphlets still exist. I'll do approximately one of the 26 keys every time we do a session, unless I feel like doing more. Depends, some of them will give us an hour of conversation and some of them won't. I actually took the 26 keys just for myself and I put each one on a little card. It's really interesting how the mind works. When they're just one after another, it's very hard to see each one by itself. But when I put it on its own little card, then somehow the mind focuses in on it differently. I've had discussions with the book designers at different times. Swamiji's writing is so dense. Dense not in the sense of opaque, but every single word, every concept is so powerful that I think we need more white space around it. The brain needs to rest after the ideas, because when you're just coming to the next paragraph, you don't always see what's in there. So I was staring at these magazine articles, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I realized I just needed visually to separate them. It's really, in general, I've been thinking about this, and I'll give you some history about the 26 keys in a minute. Because at this time that this is being recorded, which is March 2015, I'm in the process, as I think I've mentioned in other recent recordings, of working on a book about Swami Kriyananda and the founding of Ananda. I wrote a book about him almost 10 years ago, Swami Kriyananda as we have known him, and in the process of writing that book, I organized 35 years of notes into files. And I didn't really use most of those files because the book went in a different direction, that book did. But now I'm using them for this one. So I'm having this extremely interesting experience, and I've been doing it for some weeks now, and I have a few weeks more to go, of just going through file after file of collected notes on different subjects, different chronological periods, different aspects of Ananda's life or Swami's life, the life of Ananda or Swamiji's life, and I'm trying to absorb. I'm trying to go slowly, not be in a hurry. I feel like I need this whole picture in my mind before I start. But what's happening is, things are being highlighted that in the context that they came out. They just came out with so many other things, with lots of other distractions, that one just didn't necessarily notice sort of what a jewel in this paragraph, this letter, this small book. One of the secrets books that he wrote was Secrets of Emotional Healing. I think that's the name of it, something like that. The word emotion is in the title. And he has a clarification and affirmation about how to overcome all of the classic ones: greed, jealousy, hurt feelings. And there are 5 sentences, 3 sentences, just absolutely crystallized. Swami just had this way of going right into the center of something and just pulling right out the heart of it. That this is relevant to our subject tonight, so I'm going to keep going in this way. I have been rereading the book Art as a Hidden Message. As I go through the files and I come to the period of time when certain books were written, I become interested in those books. I sort of feel like I want to just hide away somewhere and just read one after another. Although I don't think I could absorb them that way, but I've been reading this one also for another class I'm giving. And art is a hidden message, and Swami's talking about how to be a true artist, a superconscious artist, and how to use artistic expression to lift one's own consciousness into superconsciousness. And he has a couple of sentences in there that I took note of, especially because, of course, I'm working on a serious writing project. And I'm going to not say it exactly, but this is the sense of it. Art springs from the center of one's own being. And by art, Swami means uplifting superconscious art, true art, not just a rearrangement of existing realities. That's a whole discussion I don't want to go into here. But art springs from the center of one's own being and is, in a sense, a communion between your own center and the center of the subject that you're trying to express. It's a very interesting way to put it. Of course, for me it's intensely relevant because I'm writing the development of Ananda and Swami's role in it. So, of course, I have to be centered in myself, and I need to write it from his center so that what I represent as his thoughts and actions will, of course, be his thoughts and actions. I've had some training in being able to do this, but that makes me not completely underconfident, but hardly cocky about the whole thing. But I was thinking of it in the context of Secrets of Emotional Healing. That's the book, Secrets of Emotional Healing. That Swamiji actually, from the center of his own understanding, he went into the center of the question of what makes a person jealous, what gives a person hurt feelings, what makes a person conceited, what makes a person greedy, all these different qualities that he responded to. And so he just hit right at where the core delusion is tied to the ego, and then began to untie it from the core. So you don't have to worry about all the little ramifications because you can just untie it from the core. In the concept of conceit, as an example, he talked about everybody has the same compelling need to act from their own center of understanding as you do. Just like that. And when you really think about conceit, that's exactly what it is. It's the thought that somehow my need to act from my center is both wiser and more important than yours. And then he goes a step further in his 3 sentences. He says, and at that center of everyone, there is the divine flow of energy. You see how if you really meditate on that, it just dissolves pride, because you realize that every single one is standing just right where they need to stand. I'm going to finish another thought, which is all just preamble for what we're really talking about tonight, but it's all relevant. In another place, Swamiji was talking about the futility of comparing yourself to anyone. This is, of course, a big problem that people face on the spiritual path, because we tend to think that others have, something we don't have access to, or we see someone who seems to be so shining and free, and we ourselves feel so clumsy and filled with doubts and delusions. However you look at it, we fall into this way of making ourselves unhappy. It's just one more technique for making ourselves unhappy, is to compare. And we can always say don't make comparisons and so on. But again, Swamiji went right into the heart of the question, just like this. Every single individual is unique. We each have a unique relationship with God. We have a unique karmic trajectory that we're following. We're all equally manifested of the same divine vibration, but in the great mystery of this universe, in which Yogananda said every single atom is dowered with individuality. Amazing use of language. Every atom is dowered with individuality, meaning it's all unique creations. Nothing is repeated, it's ever new. So each one of us has this utterly unique destiny. Swami describes it poetically as a particular melody, our own particular song, that we were born to sing, and no one will ever sing it like we're going to sing it. Jesus Christ, at the hour of his crucifixion, said when he was communing and praying to God, Lord, save me from this hour, he said, not because he was afraid in any way for himself, but because his crucifixion was a tragedy for the people he came to serve. And it was the weight of that tragedy that was tearing his heart apart. His heart was breaking for that reason, that what he had offered was being so rejected and so violently rejected. So he said, Lord, save me from this hour. But then he said, for this hour was I born. Oh, and you hear the crashing of the music. It's just such a fantastic line at such a moment. But here's what's interesting. Every one of us can and should say that about this very minute. For this hour was I born. All of our karma for who knows how many lifetimes has led us right to this moment. Everything has come to a culmination, and we have one more opportunity to attune ourselves to God or not. And when we take my life and your life and his life and her life, there is no point of comparison, because one is itself, the other is itself, the other is itself. You can't pick up I was saying earlier today, a golf ball and a tricycle and try to compare them. You can't, there's just no, how do you figure out which is which? One is a tricycle, one is a golf ball. You can't even talk about them. And so you put yourself next to someone else and try to compare it on the level of who's better, who's worse. It just can't be done. And it was such a beautiful at the heart of. Now to bring this to where we are, which is Swami's 26 Keys to Higher Awareness, Greater Awareness, he called it. Swamiji, well, he was so charming in so many ways. It's almost exactly when this is being recorded, 2 years since he passed away. It seems like, it's odd, it seems like it could be decades. You know, his absence is so intense in a certain way that it seems like it's been a long, long time. On the other hand, of course, he's omnipresent, so it's a confusing story, but it's been almost 2 years. But Swamiji often said that he was convinced that if he could just put these teachings in the right way, absolutely everybody would see that their greatness and their benefit and would embrace them. And then sometimes he would rather ruefully admit that he knew that wasn't really going to happen, but it served him to believe it, because then it was just always giving him one more sort of creative opportunity to see if this time he could really say it in such a way that the whole world would flock to it. And it was also, he felt his divine responsibility, because Master came and presented this extraordinary opportunity really to mankind, to Dwapara Yuga, and he did a certain amount, but so much remained to be done. He set the tone, he planted the thoughts in the ether, he put the vibration out, but then it's the disciples' job to creatively pull those ideas and put them into manifestation. And Swamiji never rested. He just never rested. Every day he did creative work, every single day of his life, as far as I know. Certainly every single day that I ever knew about, a day did not pass without some creative, serviceable work on his part. And he was always impatient with it. He wasn't nervous inside, that's the wrong word, but he was impatient to get it done. He was eager to get it done. No time to waste, no time to sit back. I mean, he lived 86 years, but still, no time to waste. It really had to be done. It had to be done now. And he periodically would come up with one system or another that in and of itself would be the way. And he developed the whole superconscious living training course, which was much bigger than these 26 Keys to Greater Awareness. Later he did the Material Success course, and then he did the Akash course, which were both courses in how to be practical, how to take spiritual principles and use them in a practical way, especially for financial success and as well as personal satisfaction. And well, you started with the 14 Steps to Higher Awareness, which is now the art and science of Raja Yoga. He was always looking for a way to make it so that people could access it and follow it easily. And this 26 Keys to Higher Awareness is one of those deceptively simple but profoundly beneficial possibilities that Swamiji gave to us And we put it out in a pamphlet, we put it out in a magazine article, and then it was lost in the next avalanche of creativity that Swamiji put forward. Like I've been rediscovering so many of these jewels because I've been going through it in this way. And in fact, one of the reasons for the book I'm writing is to chronicle, some of the major initiatives that Swamiji launched so that they'll be in one place. And we ourselves, as his devotees now and in future generations, can see, things that he launched and take them as our own creative possibilities. I was thinking about that in terms of the Education for Life system. Swamiji devoted a lot of energy because Master started schools for children. He started a school for children in India. It was his first project, the school in Ranchi. It was from there that he left to come to America. When he came to America at Mount Washington, he started a school for children. But he couldn't get enough children to sign up. As he said really simply, before we can have children, we have to convert their parents. We have to have their parents understand why this form of education would be of benefit to them. Then we can have schools. But as Swamiji pointed out, much of what he did, he knew he wasn't himself going to bring it to success, but he was also showing these are the directions that the teaching can be taken. And the Education for Life system, Swamiji wrote one very small book, and he put energy into it in other ways. But other people have felt, this is my calling. And from Master's beginning and Swami's endorsement and expansion of that, just a whole vast universe of possibilities is opening up. So everything Swami did was seminal in that way. And even these 26 keys, he went from the center of himself right into the center of what it is that really defines us, and he puts it in terms of success. And he writes a little introduction, which I put on little cards so I could see it more clearly. And he starts, he was, lesser minds try to particularize what they do. Jesus Christ was the only one. He was the one who did this. He was the only one who did it. He's your only Savior. It's the only possibility. They try to particularize it, and then somewhere in their thinking, especially Westerners have this, fall into this delusion, we make him singular and then he becomes the only one. The Eastern point of view has always been, the more you can tie in whatever the present shining star is with all the stars that have come before, the more you can show that this is consistent with all the greatness that has come before, that is the proof of its greatness, not its singularity. As Swamiji said, if there is infinity, there can only be one of them. You can't have simultaneous infinities. If there is truth, you can't have a whole bunch of them. You can have a lot of iterations, you can have a lot of expressions of it, but nonetheless, if there's any one reality, then all roads must eventually lead to that. So Swamiji, in thinking about these 26 keys to greater awareness, he starts out by saying, a study of the lives of successful men and women, and he says, in business and politics, in the arts, in entertainment, whatever field it is, he said there are two unifying characteristics. He says an abundance of energy, particularly for those activities in which they have achieved their success, and a greater than usual degree of awareness, energy and awareness. So when he's starting to write these 26 keys, he's telling us right from the beginning, these are the two themes that we're going to work with. Because if we really want to be successful, we need to understand energy, and we have to apply that energy with awareness. I mean, a person can just pick up a hammer and, just pound against the wall, but there also has to be some refinement of understanding about what I'm trying to accomplish. What is the center of what I'm going to be able to do? I'm going to start first with the awareness because it's a very interesting concept and one that I've thought about a lot, and I know this is, because of Swamiji, I think about this. Expansion of awareness in a very interesting sense is, as Swami says, almost the definition of progress or success. I think of it in terms of even just small children. A baby is born, and the baby is born thinking in terms of reincarnation. You know, it's such a strange thought to realize that the old man dies and then is reborn as an infant. The old woman dies and is reborn as an infant. So you have the baby there, and babies are so small and so incapable, you know, in the first months or years of their life. They can't control their bodies, they can't communicate in language, they can't conceptualize their surroundings, but the full consciousness that was there, that may have been an extremely expanded and highly intelligent, refined consciousness at the moment of death, the consciousness is the one thing that carries over. And that whole consciousness incarnates in that baby's body. I mean, this is why, you know, when one tunes in sometimes to babies, you feel something there that is way beyond just toes and toys, as Master put it, just way beyond that. You can look into the eyes of children and just see something quite different, because the full intelligence and the full consciousness is there. But what's missing and what has to be learned is an awareness of how to function in this world. And that's what babies do. They become more and more aware of their surroundings. They become more and more aware of how they're supposed to relate to those surroundings. Master talks about being an infant in the crib, and his consciousness roaming in the Himalayas, and he said he was filled with prayerful surges that he wished to articulate but didn't have the capacity to articulate, and often he would cry in helpless frustration because he simply couldn't express who he was through that tiny body. One of the reasons why it's important to hold on to your body for as long as you can. When our friend Happy Winningham, who left this planet some years ago, she was an early AIDS patient. She got AIDS very early in that cycle, and for the last few years of her life, it was a constant struggle to stay in her body, and she'd had a number of death and return experiences, and she had absolutely no fear of death. She knew exactly where she was going, and it was a place that she would be happy to go to, especially because her body was difficult. As she put it, it was like having a bad flu all the time. And so she spoke to Swami Kriyananda very seriously. What should I do? You know, I can take another round of the medication. I don't have to die yet. But she also, just like this, said, you know, I'm perfectly happy to die. I don't have this compelling need that I have to live. When is it appropriate to keep trying? And when is it appropriate to just say enough and let it go? And Swami's answer was perfect. I actually put this as a story in the book I referred to, Swami Kriyananda as We Have Known Him. Because he said, well, you know, unless you're going to be liberated from all necessity to incarnate, and I don't think Happy was under any illusions about that being her state of consciousness, whatever your interlude in the astral world, sooner or later your unfinished material karma is going to bring you back to this planet. And the way people come back are to the material world, whether this planet or another. Master said there's lots of planets. But in one way or another, you're going to have to start over as an infant. And you're going to have to spend all that time that infants have to spend, you know, just learning the most fundamental things about how to feed yourself with a spoon, how to walk. And yes, it can be enjoyable. Some babies enjoy themselves more than others. Some are frustrated entirely the whole time. It just sort of depends on who you are and how you feel. You can remember your former capacities, and it can be quite aggravating to have them all seemingly taken away from you. He said, but it's a long time through childhood, a long time through adolescence, just to bring you back to the point of maturity where you can find your spiritual path and pick up where you left off. He said, why waste all that time? As long as you can continue to make spiritual progress in the body you're in. In other words, unless and until that body becomes such an obstacle to your expansion of consciousness. He said you should do what you can to keep it. I mean, he's not saying heroic medical measures or take difficult drug treatments if you don't feel to, but he was giving us a criteria. As long as we can keep learning spiritually, we should stay in this body, because it's taken us a long time to get to the point where we understand that's what we want. And then, of course, when it's done, when it just doesn't serve you anymore, then you just let it go. As Master said, once you've eaten the wisdom dinner off the plate of life, you can just toss the plate away because you've taken what was needed. So we come back as babies, and then we have to start expanding our awareness. We have to learn first on the most mundane physical level, on the intellectual level, to learn to read or to write or to play music or to paint or dance, whatever it might be. Even if we develop it to a very high level, very few people are born with those talents intact. They may be born with a strong inclination towards something and have a great ability for it that is different than our age would show us. But nonetheless, we have to learn it all over again, and we have to find our spiritual path, and we have to begin our spiritual practices again. Very few people are born into the homes of yogis, because yogis tend not to marry and have children. So, as the Gita says, such births are hard to come by. It's very fortunate to be raised from childhood with a true understanding. That's part of what our schools give to children, our Ananda schools. But in any case, we have to heighten our awareness. And the greater awareness we have, the greater capacity we have both for creativity and for happiness and for right relationship to other people. And that awareness may be the awareness of the techniques required for whatever we're trying to do, and also an awareness of the art of whatever we're trying to do. Because it's always that combination of art and science that makes something possible. And the more successful a person is, the greater awareness they have of what they're doing. Now, awareness is not the same as knowledge, because sometimes a person who has greater awareness may actually have less knowledge. I'll use Swami as an example as a composer. Swamiji composed music and knew very little, especially when he began, about the mechanics of composing music. As he said himself, it was a little tricky sometimes because he would hear what he wanted to compose, but he didn't know where it was on the keyboard. He didn't know where it was on the musical staff. He could hear the chord and he'd have to try to find it. And then he'd hear the next chord and he'd have to try to find it, because he didn't have the knowledge of what those chords were and where they would be and how to write them down and all of that. But he had a tremendous awareness of the music because he could hear it. And he had a tremendous sense of going into the heart of what he was trying to do, the center of what he was trying to do. If he wanted a melody to express the experience he had at the Holy Sepulchre in the Holy Land in Israel, he could go right into the heart of that, and he could translate that experience into music because he had a great awareness of the power of music, and he had a great awareness of the vibration of the sepulchre. He didn't have the knowledge of the theories and the techniques of music, but he had a great awareness of music itself. And so anybody, especially who innovates, has that kind of awareness. Steve Jobs is a very interesting example of that. I'm speaking to you from Palo Alto, which is right in Silicon Valley, and Apple Computers is a big company here, and Steve was sort of one of the local heroes for sure. But he had so much awareness of the possibilities. He had so much imagination. I love the remark he made once when someone suggested he should do some market research about what people wanted, what their products, what they wanted to do. And his response was, "They don't know what they want until I invent it." He said like that. He had an awareness of the possibilities that was so much greater than anyone else's. And he had an awareness of what people wanted before they knew they wanted it. And when you just look at his inventions, he's defined the whole age. Interestingly, although he lived just maybe 2 miles from our temple, he never participated in anything that we did, but he was directly connected to Master through the autobiography of a yogi, which is a very salutary point for all of us, which is that, the institution, the organization, Ananda serves many of us beautifully. But what it serves us is to connect ourselves with God and Guru. And in and of itself, if we find it useful, it's useful. But it's not a requirement. It's the connection to God and Guru that matters. And whatever it was that Steve had to do, it was helping to bring in Dwapara Yuga, and Master was right there helping him do it. And he had that awareness. He was aware of possibilities that the ordinary person just didn't know. The ordinary person just works along the same channels and maybe refines it a little bit or is a little more efficient, but it doesn't have the awareness of what could be done. And then with that awareness, Swami writes, there has to be an abundance of energy. And as we get further into these 26 keys, that all the different ways that energy expresses itself really comes back. Because, well, there's many reasons why energy is required, but if you're really going to accomplish something in this world, there's a tide that's always moving, and it's not always going up. Everything is born, it just flowers for a while, then it disintegrates and dies, and we're just like that. And the tendency of human consciousness is not necessarily, there's a pull toward rising, but there's also a pull downward, a pull toward lethargy and sloth and sleep and unawareness and all of those qualities. And to really make something happen, you have to gather your forces, and you have to pull it out of the ether. You have to create a tremendous power of inner magnetism and then hold to that reality and not let it go. And that's what you see in successful people. They work hard and they work smart. But smart means they work with awareness. They understand what they're doing and what the consequences of it are. And they don't just put out energy by running in foolish circles. They're very aware of the heart of their project, and then they're unrelenting in putting the energy behind it. And this is just simply what's required for success. As Swami says at the end of this paragraph, a deficiency of both energy and awareness is what characterizes people of mediocre ability. No, it's not like we're trying to be the most brilliant in the world, but we're trying to be the best that we can be. And so the key is to greater awareness. The key is to energy and increasing our awareness, increase our awareness of everything. Here's another comment that's really important about awareness. Bliss is consciousness fully aware. That's how Swami expressed it. When our consciousness is fully aware, what we become aware of is that bliss is our only reality. Now, I reversed that when I read that sentence, and I realized, therefore, any suffering, any pain, anything other than bliss is by definition a lack of awareness. Because when we're in a full state of awareness, which is to say when we're fully realized and conscious of the divine presence around us, we perceive whatever it is and wherever we are as perfect bliss. So if we're not perceiving perfect bliss, we're not fully aware. Which is an interesting way to deal, again, to go to the heart of any pain or suffering that you have. What am I not aware of that's causing me to suffer? I mean, a very simple example, you're attached to something and it's taken away from you. And what you're conscious of is that I've lost something that I want, I've lost something that I depend on, so I'm suffering. Okay, that's a fact in itself. It's not like, as Swamiji said, you can't just say, I should feel differently, so I do feel differently. And he said it also very sweetly. He said, if your stomach is unwell and you have a stomach ache, you feel it. He said, if you have a heartache, you're also going to feel it. You can't pretend you're not feeling it. But to feel it, and then also to suffer because my heart is broken, what am I not aware of? How am I not seeing the bliss behind this? What good thing is God giving me that I'm not yet aware of? Isn't that an interesting way to put it? And that's just going right to the center of whatever the issue is. And it can't be done just like that. But it it's a way of opening our consciousness to possibilities that we might not have been open to otherwise. I have another thought hovering on the edge, and I can't quite remember it. Let me see if I can find it. No, I don't think it's going to come to me, so I'll have to go on. Swamiji then goes on to say in his introduction to these 26 keys that we have an inclination to think that a great state of awareness or a great state of energy is, as he calls it, nature's blessing on the fortunate few. Of course, that doesn't take into account reincarnation. As Swamiji said, you see someone whose life seems to just go effortlessly and all success comes to them, and their life is charmed from start to finish. He says you see this incarnation, but you don't see all the incarnations of effort that they put in to bring everything to that particular point. He said nothing happens as an accident. He said it's bestowed gratuitously on a fortunate few, is how he put it. He said such is not the case. He said a person is never doomed to a twilight of incompetence or failure, either by genetics, environment, circumstances, nothing. He said a person dooms himself by the attitude toward our own lives. And he says we remain tepid. I love Swami's language. We remain merely tepid if we meet life's challenges only half-heartedly. And there you have it. The energy and the awareness. We have to go after things completely with the energy with which we respond to the circumstances of our lives determines whether or not those circumstances bring us down or whether we're able to use those circumstances as a stepping stone to greater expansion, whether that expansion is consciousness, prosperity, health, wealth, happiness, whatever it might be. Energy and awareness increase if we respond. But we have a lot of really bad habits, and as we go through these 26 keys, that's exactly what we're going to be working with. Each one of these keys represents for us a fundamental attitude that if we practice it and really master it and make it part of our little quiver of options when life threatens to throw us off course, and we're following these rules of behavior, these laws of life, these ways of turning whatever energy comes to us into energy for our benefit, then everything simply goes better. And this is all about how to avoid pain and how to find greater happiness. Success can be measured in many different ways. Master used to tell a story about a man who had just a quarter acre of a farm, and he worked hard to grow enough food out of there to support himself in a modest way. And someone offered to give him more land, and if he had more land, then he could grow more. And he said, yes, but if I had more land and I grew more, he said, then what time would I have left for singing? Is how he put it. Meaning that success is not just material abundance, it's also the wealth of the spirit and the wealth of the heart. In this respect, interestingly, all through Swamiji's life, there are many themes in Swamiji's life, which is, of course, what I'm trying to get an overview here. And certainly one of the really big ones was Master's warning about the terrible cataclysms that are coming. And that was Master's exact words. You don't know what a terrible cataclysm is coming. Master declaimed that in 1951. And here we are this is being recorded in 2015. That's a long time later. That's a whole generation virtually come and gone. But for Swamiji, who heard Master declaim it and speak of it so often, Master seemed like it was coming in the morning. And so all through Swamiji's life, he would constantly come back to the necessity, his responsibility as Master's representative, to carry this sometimes unwelcome and unpleasant message that we cannot depend on the prosperity and comfort that has characterized our lives for so many decades, that great changes are coming, socially, politically, in terms of peace or war. And Swami always felt that Master's word cataclysm implied also that the earth itself is getting tired of our rapacious attitude and our lack of reverence and respect, and as he said, may shake us off like fleas on a dog. So Swamiji was also in these 26 keys, in the Superconscious Living course, in the Akash Material Success course, everything. He's wanting to plant within as many people as are willing to accept it and nurture the plant, these ways of navigating when the atmosphere and the environment is not so easy to manipulate, and when the world is not so congenial to our desires, that we have internalized our strength and are able to go forward in a way that generates success and happiness, rather than that just makes us feel more and more discouraged. So Swamiji writes here that we condemn ourselves to mediocrity, and by that it doesn't necessarily mean that your painting is bad, but having a mediocre experience of life, which is not really fulfilling our divine destiny, because we're not wholehearted in our response. I was interested in an elderly relative of mine. At one point I was urging upon him a certain course of action, and I said to him, as if it were self-evident, well, don't you want to grow? I was very touched in a painful way by him looking at me. He said, no, like that, no. And then with great heartfelt energy said, I've suffered enough. Meaning I don't want to risk anymore. I just want to hold on to the little I have until I die. And soon after he began to, age-related dementia began to set in, and I felt like he was just taking a holiday. He just wanted a little holiday. He'd had enough. But some people take the holiday when they're 14 and take it through their whole life. And it doesn't serve us, because there's no end to the story, you see. Death and age don't end it. You take a brief hiatus and then you're right back where you started. And whatever suffering you're having it. Whatever joy you can access, you're having it. So it serves us to learn to be 100%. Swamiji says, how often people just think it's too much trouble. They're just not willing to try. They'd rather watch television. And then they lament that their life hasn't turned out the way they wanted it to turn out. One of Master's great dictums that we have to always remember in terms of energy and awareness, he put it very simply, the greater the will, the greater the flow of energy. Energy is not just something that comes to us by accident, it's something we will to have. And the more we learn to exercise that will, and what goes with it is energy and enthusiasm for what we're doing, the more energy flows through us. And the more energy flows through us, the more we can accomplish, the more dynamic we feel. Energy has its own intelligence, the more we become aware of our own experiences, and it really builds on itself. And it gets to be a habit. I was remembering an experience we had here a few summers ago. A couple was getting married, and we were having a big wedding, and it was being set up in the courtyard of our community here. And the couple had many friends in many places, so it was a very large event. And the whole community was making it happen. And I was officiating at the ceremony, but I went to sort of see how things were going. And somehow or another, an unfortunate choice had been made in terms of the altar that we were going to use with the pictures of the Master. It was really the centerpiece of the whole event. And the altar table that was being used was simply too small. And the person setting it up knew it was too small, but felt a little constrained somehow to do something about it. Now, of course, I have an advantage, because a friend of mine who was a Lutheran minister for many decades in churches in the Midwest before he came to California and became a self-realizationist, he jokingly said, the job of the minister of a church is the one who can say, yes, we can throw that away. He said, because everybody's afraid, they think that it belongs to somebody else. When you have so many volunteers, it's not really clear sometimes where the responsibility lies. And so the person putting up the altar was a little unclear where the responsibility lies, but I just looked at it and I thought, this isn't adequate. This isn't adequate to the needs of the moment. And we just had to solve the problem. Later, people told me that they were sort of taken aback. But we had to solve the problem. And I didn't know how the problem would be solved, but it had to be solved. The will had to be set in motion that we were going to solve this problem. And we ended up roaming all over the community. We ended up taking a wheelbarrow and filling it with concrete bricks and hauling bricks here and there. And, you know, I'm a strong woman, but I'm not a large woman. But the greater the will, the greater the flow of energy. And about 4 other people just got sucked behind that wake, and we fixed it. You know, it took us about an hour, and it took a lot of energy, but we did it because it had to be done. You couldn't say, oh, it's too much trouble, we'll make do with what we have. I'm not talking about a false perfectionism. I'm talking about that tendency in our mind where we say, this isn't really what it should be, but it's too much trouble to fix it. Swamiji really took that attitude out of us. That's all I can say. You know, he was not unreasonable, and he was not a false perfectionist. He was extremely appropriate in what he asked, but he was very attuned to why we were or were not putting out energy. And when it was just, it's too much trouble, he didn't have a lot of patience with that. And you know, you learn to rise to the occasion. That was one of the reasons why I found Swami Kriyananda's company so marvelous, is because his own energy level was so high. I mean, just his resting energy level was so high. I mean, virtually his sleeping energy level was so high that when you were with him, and it wasn't like he oppressed you. I mean, he was cheerful and fun and very natural and easy to be with. It wasn't like he was always giving commands and pressuring you and making you feel inadequate. Just the opposite. He had so much faith and love you, but just basically the energy level was really high. And you had to be wide awake. You couldn't just be sort of staring off in space and not listening. And you couldn't just sort of say any dumb thing that occurred to you to say. I mean, you could, but then you would be held responsible for it. And you had to be able to answer, and you had to be able to go on to the next level. You just couldn't drift. And I found that wonderful, because it was exactly where I wanted to be. I wanted to have high, clear, aware energy. And Swamiji had very high, clear, aware energy. And in his company, if you wanted to have it, you could have it too. Plus, just anything we did with him, he asked that you put your full energy behind it. I had to learn to write. It was one of the karmic responsibilities of this lifetime for me, was to learn to write. And wow, it was not easy. He literally threw away my writing, for much of my writing, for almost 10 years. And it was not easy. I finally had to stop for a while. I couldn't do it anymore. I mean, I'd hit it lucky every once in a while, because he knew I had it in me. And but I didn't have any confidence. It was a chaotic karma. There's no point in explaining it. But I had it in me, and every so often I could come up with it. But he just kept at me. And if it wasn't good enough, he made me do it again, or he just threw it away and did it himself, in such a way that I just kept having to come back, increase my awareness, increase my energy, until I broke through. And you know, that's like, do we meet it half-heartedly? Do we say it's just too much trouble? I'm just going to let this one go? For me, you know, reincarnation is very vivid in my awareness. I have a belief in a few recollections of past lives that I think are valid. Some are deductions, some are recollections. But the most relevant reality of reincarnation is you either do it now or you do it later. And when you do it later, it'll be now. Because the now that you're dealing with was the then when you didn't deal with it. Can you follow all of that? Then I didn't put out enough energy to resolve it. So now is later, and now it's now. And if I don't put out the energy to resolve it now,
it's going to be later, and when it comes then, it's going to be now. And when, there's some challenge facing me, it's not that I, by any means, am always capable of dealing with it, but I try not to meet it half-heartedly, because I don't want to see it again. If it's causing me grief, Lord of mercy, now is bad enough. I don't want to have to do it again and again and again. It's not that I can finish karma necessarily, but I'm going to put out as much will as I can, generate as much energy as I can, and not be accused of being half-hearted, because that's the only possible way. Otherwise, suffering goes on indefinitely. And there's a certain point at which we've had enough. That's all. My elderly relative just took a little vacation. Good-hearted man, and vacation was needed. He'd really gone as far as he could go. And all his goodness will bring him to a nice spot the next time, and he gets to start. But it was a habit, and it caught up with him. And we don't want to make those our habits. Swami talks about, and he's often talked about the fact that, what really gives us energy, what blocks our energy is our unwillingness. We use the word willpower, but the word willingness is also a part of it. Because if you really want to do something, you always have the energy to do it. And he uses the example of, you're exhausted from a hard day at work, and you have housework to do, but you just don't feel like you have the energy to do it at all. You can't even get up off the couch, except your phone rings and a great friend from the past is in town. He's just in town for tonight, and he wants you to come out and go to dinner with him. And you just pop right up, change your clothes, head out to dinner, and somewhere around midnight, when you finally come back into the house, you remember that you were lying on the couch without the energy to get up and go boil an egg for your dinner. Where did the energy come from? It's really actually a very real question. Where did the energy come from? And Master answers it. We live in a field of energy. The physicists are answering it now, that there's literally unlimited energy in the universe. When Master would give lectures, he would sometimes pinch like that, He said, and these were his words, "There's enough energy in a single gram of your flesh to keep the city of Chicago in electricity for a week." I mean, you sort of think, wow, where is it in there? The whole city of Chicago in electricity for a week, and it's right there in my physical body. And then we're always feeling so tired. Well, what happens is we're pushing on two sides of the door. One side is pushing toward this job that has to be done, and the other one is thinking so much about how we can't do it or don't want to do it, or why am I always the one who has to do it? You hear it in people's voices. Oh, do we really have to? Children are so amazing that way. I don't want to, children will say. I remember a task that my mother set me to. I'd created a mess in my room and then gaily sailed away and wasn't going to deal with it. My mother brought me back to my room. I don't know how old I was, 2, 3 at the most. I was very small. And I had to pick up this mess I'd made in the middle of the room and put it back on a shelf. And I vividly remember sitting there with this. I was completely, Swami has this phrase called the unwillingness monster. I was completely in the grip of the unwillingness monster. I had become the personification of the unwillingness monster. I had enjoyed creating the mess, and now that my mother was going to make me clean it up, I was unwillingness incarnate. And my unwillingness manifested as this limp, sort of complete inability even to lift, one little teddy bear and put it on the shelf. And I remember with this incredible sense of melodrama that must have amused the heck out of my mother. And I would pick up the teddy bear, and then I would do that little fake cry that kids do when they're just trying to be pathetic. And then I remember sort of dropping it in exhaustion on the shelf and then trying to recover enough to pick up the next little tiny item. Really. And part of me remembers also thinking, oh, just cut it out and put the darn toys back on the shelf. Part of me knew that the whole thing was just an act, that I was perfectly capable of putting those toys back on the shelf in just a minute if I wanted to. point was I didn't want to. And see, what we get into in our lives is we don't want to. We want, I don't like this karma. Do you have any other karma besides this that you could give me? This karma is a mistake. This is not my favorite karma. You know, is nobody listening to me? Didn't I tell you already? I don't want to do this. And we just go and go and go and go with that. And what happens to our energy? We have none. Because we're not willing to face it. The challenges that come to us, we're half-hearted in our response to them. Because we don't want to. It's very interesting because in the Festival of Light that Swami wrote, there is the allegory of the little bird. And the little bird is the representative of the soul, and it goes out on this great, there's a symbol of the soul, the individual soul. It goes out on this great divine journey. It's going to have all these marvelous experiences. It's going to be generous in its relationship to life, and it's going to come back to God realization. But instead, the bird gets involved. And the bird gets involved, and it starts getting, proud of itself. It begins to identify with this little individual, separate expression of the divine, and begins to think that my real happiness comes from puffing up this little wave. Instead of thinking of myself as part of the ocean, I'm just going to identify with this little wave. And so the bird starts out on this divine mission to be a representative of the infinite and to act as God acts in this world. But instead we identify with the egoic self. We become very limited in our expression, and we begin to revolt against, divine law itself. And we begin to imagine our happiness will come from my self-interest and from keeping what is mine for myself, is how it's expressed there. And so the soul enters the second stage of its long journey, which is called the revolt. And the revolt is the unwillingness. The revolt says, no. I'm not going to accept and adjust to truth and what is. I'm not going to try to tune into God's will. God is going to do it my way. I'm just going to rebel. And in the allegory, it doesn't really work very well because we cannot declare reality. We have to become aware of it. And then we have to become aware of how to harmonize ourselves with it. We can't merely keep insisting that it needs to be this way. So we suffer. And our lack of energy is primarily our unwillingness to accept what needs to be done and to face into what is required to do it. It's too much trouble, or I wish it's not happening. And then when something comes that we really want to do, we find we have all the energy in the world for it. So you see, the secret here, it's pretty self-evident, isn't it? Which is that we have to want what God wants of us. And what God wants of us, one of the clues, the way you can tell, is the circumstances we're asked to face, the karma that has come to us. This is what needs to be done. For this hour was I born. And when the little bird finally lets go of the revolt and enters into the stage which is called the quest, where he may not yet understand, but now he wants to understand. And then what happens is that the universe can help him. And so here we are. We have 26 keys to greater awareness. And the greater awareness is going to be the greater awareness of how we're made, why we were born, and then what we can do about it. Energy and greater awareness. Greater energy, greater awareness. Keys to success and happiness in everything that we do. God bless you.